Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. So today we are going to be speaking about autism acceptance in this webinar. So this is our April focus for us to discuss. As you can see, we've got people with us today, which is very exciting. But just to our usual introduction, so my name's Jemma. I'm the Business Development Lead here at My Learning Cloud, and I've worked for the organisation for about 8 years now. And health and social care is my background and my passion, and always will be. And I like to bring that into everything I do here at My Learning Cloud. I'm now going to pass over to our guests. You'll recognise Amy from previous webinars, so over to you, Amy.
Hi, thank you, Gemma. I am Amy. I'm the Senior Digital Content Specialist with My Learning Cloud. So I basically look after all the e-learning courses that we do here. And I've joined this webinar because as Gemma has, I have a background in health and social care, and my kind of area of expertise and my passion is in supporting autistic individuals. So I've jumped on this webinar today, and we're joined by a very special guest. Thank you for joining us, Bex. Would you like to just introduce yourself, what you do day to day?
Yeah, thank you. So my name's Bex, and I work for a charity called Autism Unlimited. We're based down near Christchurch in Dorset on the south coast. And my role is inclusion training specialist. And I've worked here for nearly 2 years, and I design and deliver courses and training around autism and neurodiversity.
Amazing, thank you. Are we happy to just jump straight into it? Let's go. So Bex, I was wondering if you could give us, for people joining today who maybe might not have as full of an understanding of what autism really is, could you give us a brief overview of kind of what autism is and the key characteristics associated with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll do my best to give a brief overview, because autism is quite a complex condition and it presents in individuals in lots of different ways. But fundamentally, autism is a condition where the brain has developed in a way that's different to what is considered usual. It's a lifelong condition. It's something that you are born with. You cannot catch it, you cannot give it to somebody else, and you cannot cure it, even though many people claim that they have cured it. They haven't. So I like to describe autism as a different way of understanding and interacting with the world. And the best way that we can talk about autism is to think about 4 key areas of difference. And those are communication, social understanding, sensory sensitivity, and repetitive behaviour. So every autistic individual will experience challenges to some degree in each of these 4 areas.
Perfect, thank you. And I mean, we quite often speak about autism as a spectrum. So I know you said like it's hard to do it in a brief kind of overview because every individual is so different. But I guess kind of one of my key hang-ups is the common misconception that spectrum is kind of a linear scale, right? You have one end individuals who might not struggle with kind of things quite as much, and another end, language has been used like high and low functioning, and kind of the importance of moving away from that and seeing it not as that linear scale but a spectrum of how these key characteristics affect each individual individually. We're not kind of comparing individuals to each other on this spectrum. It's the spectrum of the effect that these kind of characteristics can have on the individual and their daily life.
Absolutely, yeah. And, the understanding of autism has actually come a long way in recent years. Those functioning labels you referred to, they were used when people were diagnosed. It was a diagnosis of low functioning autism or high functioning autism. And I think, like you said, people had this idea that the spectrum was, well, you're either low functioning or you're somewhere in between up to high functioning. And as a diagnostic label, functioning labels aren't used anymore. They're actually really harmful. if somebody is labelled as high functioning, then you're assuming something about their capability. And, you know, you might get an adult, somebody like myself, for example, who has a job and they seem to be presenting as a functioning member of society when they're in that job. But then when they're at home, it's a very different story. I require a lot of support to keep my household running that you wouldn't assume a high functioning person would need. But then equally, if we look at it from the point of view of someone who is deemed low functioning, you're assuming that they don't have any capacity to learn any new skills. They're not able to be independent. They're not able to do things on their own. So these labels are actually really limiting, which is why we've moved away from them. And it's just like you said, it's about focusing on the individual and the support that they might need in each of those different areas, but at that particular time and in that particular place, because a person's level of need will change and it will fluctuate. And you might find that somebody's able to do something on one day, but the following day they need extra support with it, because that is the nature of autism. It doesn't stay still, it isn't static, it fluctuates and it changes, and it's really dynamic.
Absolutely. That kind of leads us on quite nicely. I wanted to cover a few myth busters in this webinar. So I've kind of spoken about that linear scale. I might kick us off. One of my key kind of areas of misconception that is coming a long way, and the understanding is improving, but the kind of misunderstandings around women and girls with autism, autistic women and girls, sorry. And there's kind of been previously a lot of research has focused on men and boys, and kind of the importance of understanding that women and girls are affected by autism, but also the fact that the presentation may vary slightly, and kind of understanding and identifying and supporting those needs in autistic women and girls.
Yeah, definitely. This is an area that I'm really passionate about as well, and certainly one that I think needs a lot more focus and a lot more attention. So currently, if we're looking at diagnostic ratios, 1 female is diagnosed for every 4 males. But looking at anecdotal evidence, it's actually more likely to be a 50-50 split. So 50% of autistic people are female and 50% are male. But it's like you said, a lot of the initial research into autism was all based around boys, as is actually the case for lots of medical conditions. And it's only within sort of the last 10, 15 years that an understanding of how autism presents in females has really been developed. We do know that females are more likely to mask. Not saying that it's an exclusively female characteristic, but I think because of the way that society is and the way that we bring up our children, certainly previously, I think it's changing now, but there were quite different expectations on girls than there were on boys. And as a young girl, you were sort of expected to sit nicely and play nicely and speak nicely and, you know, not cause trouble, whereas boys were allowed to be a little bit more sort of rough and tumble. So even from a very young age, girls were sort of being conditioned to fit this ideal social model of what it was to be female. So if you were an autistic female, the impact that that was going to have on you was feeling that you had to really try very hard to fit in with that, that social norm. I know that for myself, when I was growing up, I was absolutely terrified of sticking out, of being different. And I think that's something that a lot of autistic people can relate to. But particularly being in social situations with other females, it was more likely that my difference would have been picked up on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And whereas I think with boys, it's not quite the same. Obviously, I'm not a boy, I don't have that experience, but from my observations and from my male friends, you can be a little bit odd or a little bit strange, and it's not quite such a big deal. So that is one element that has sort of limited females from getting a diagnosis. It's the fact that they are more likely to mask. I'm aware of several people who have tried to access diagnosis, tried to get a referral, and being told by their GP or by their consultant, but you're making eye contact and you're able to hold a conversation and you get sarcasm. These are medical professionals, some of whom work in the field of autism, and they are still falling back on these quite old stereotypes of what it means to be autistic. And if you are an autistic female, you've learnt to mask, you've learnt that you should give people eye contact, you've learnt how to make conversation, you might well have a good understanding of sarcasm and how it works, because not all autistic people don't understand sarcasm. It's these broad, sweeping, general statements which I think have really impacted women quite a lot.
Absolutely.
So I think that's probably the biggest barrier, I think, for women. And you've probably heard people saying, oh, but you don't look autistic. And I always think, well, what do you expect an autistic person to look like? Is it what we might have seen in the media, where you have somebody who is perhaps a non-speaking autistic person with limited means of communication, somebody who doesn't really interact socially unless they're with people that they're very comfortable with, like their family, for example? Is that what you see as autism? Because if it is, that's only a small percentage. And quite typically, those representations have all been male as well.
Absolutely. That's really quite interesting, because I chose to do research on autism as part of my time at university, and I actually focused on how social kind of perceptions of gender impact the underdiagnosis of women and girls. So what you were saying about kind of the masking, the expectations of girls to act in a certain way that's different to boys. It was really interesting to see that not only did that affect the way that girls kind of masked and stuff, but it also affects other people's understanding of autism, like you said, actual medical professionals, but also parents. You know, you in the media, all this information that you get about autism, you know, you're looking for a certain kind of person, you're given this idea. So as a autistic female adult, it's difficult to go and access that. It's more difficult as a child for your parents to recognize that and get that support. And then when you do get to the doctors, I mean, I have personal anecdotal evidence of sitting in front of a psychiatrist who told me, I'm not taking your kind of request for an autism diagnosis any further because you're making eye contact with me. It made me laugh when you said that, because those are words that I've actually personally heard. It is so true. And again, with the media, like through my research, people were still referencing Rain Man. People were still referencing like, you know, the association with the MMR vaccine, which was disproved 20 years ago. These kind of damaging
absolutely,
like assumptions and misconceptions, they kind of permeate understanding through public and medical communities, and it is so difficult to overcome them even this much later when things have been disproved. It seems to be the misconceptions that remain, and it's such a fight to kind of overcome those and you know, improve understanding and awareness. So it's really, really interesting to kind of hear that. Are there any, apart from women, I could talk about this all day, like I said, but is there one other kind of big misconception, big myth about kind of autism that you would, it is your bugbear that you would like to kind of take this opportunity to break? Hard to pick one.
The one that stands out to me, because it's probably one that I hear the most often, is that everyone's a bit autistic or everyone's a bit on the spectrum. And this, it's a really interesting myth to try and bust, because I think most people who say that say it because they don't want autistic people to feel like they're different or that they're excluded. They're trying to say, oh, well, I've experienced that and I've experienced that, so you're not on your own, you're not on your own, which is a really nice thing to try and do. But actually, it has the opposite effect. It's quite diminishing. It doesn't really acknowledge the autistic experience. I've had quite a few instances where people have said, like, oh, you know, you've said you're autistic. What does that mean? What's that like for you? And I'll start explaining it and they go, oh, that's the same for me. I experienced that as well. And I'm like, okay, you may well have some similar experiences to me, but it's not a global, all day, every day, this is your experience. And that's, I know, I liken it to if you wake up in the morning and you're feeling a bit queasy and you're really tired, you know, these are symptoms that we all might experience, but you wouldn't say, oh, I must be a little bit pregnant. Because you either are pregnant or you aren't. You might experience some of the same symptoms of pregnancy. You know, you might feel sick and you might be really tired and lacking in energy, etc. But that doesn't mean that you are a little bit pregnant. In the same way that you may struggle in social situations, you might feel quite anxious about it. You might have certain aspects of communication that you find challenging, but that doesn't mean that you're a little bit autistic. It just means that you have a particular challenge or a particular struggle in that area. So that's what I want to say, really, because I think that's one of the most common things I hear. But also on the flip side of that, sometimes people say that because they are actually autistic themselves and they haven't quite realized it yet, and they're just sort of on the beginning of their journey of realizing. So I think it's I always try and challenge people when they say that to me. I'm like, okay, right, so explain that to me a bit more, and why do you think that? And sometimes they just say, is everyone on the spectrum? And then I go, no, and that's okay.
And if people are on the beginning of that journey, Bex, that you're talking about, and they are recognizing symptoms, and I think social media has played a big part in this as well, of bringing symptoms to light, which, like you said, a lot of people will connect with.
Yeah.
But it's not, you know, some people might be picking up on it because they have got symptoms that may, like you said, lead to understanding that they may, you know, have autism, get a diagnosis of autism. However, it's very difficult, I think, with social media at the moment, kind of pushing that narrative, and that's where that kind of momentum of we're all on the spectrum has come from, because people are relating to small snippets of videos that they're seeing rather than actually fully understanding the diagnosis.
Yeah, I think with social media, I think there are some really brilliant positive aspects, and I think it's a really good way for autistic and neurodivergent people to speak their truth and to make their voices heard, which previously, let's face it, we didn't really have that platform. But then equally, like you say, Gemma, it's these really small snippets that almost everybody on the planet could relate to, but because it is presented as an autistic characteristic rather than just being, you know, part of the human experience, people can be quite quick to latch onto that. And I guess the caution that I would advise is it's about building up kind of your evidence file, saying, okay, I relate to that. That's an aspect I relate to. Let me look into this a bit further. Are there other aspects that I can research that I also relate to? You know, it's not just about having one thing that you have in common. It's the whole sort of global experience. But you know, social media is designed to be digested in very small chunks. It's not there to say like, oh, here's here's a 30-page thesis on everything that might make you autistic. So it's kind of, people have to take on a bit of personal responsibility, I think. And we know that it's really hard trying to access a referral for an assessment. We know that once you are referred, the waiting times are just crazy. So if it is something that you really feel could be relevant to you and you want to pursue it, then I think those people would put in the time and the effort. I think you're always going to get an element of people sort of wanting to jump on the bandwagon and say, oh yeah, I think I've got ADHD because I do this, or I saw this thing about autism and I do that, so that means I'm autistic. And I think we almost have to kind of ride the wave a little bit and wait for the noise to die down, because I think people are they'll move on to the next thing, won't they? And currently, autism and ADHD are very prevalent in the press. They're very prevalent across social media. Yeah.
Thank you. So kind of moving on from that, obviously, is Autism Acceptance Month. We kind of want to focus on the acceptance part of it. So kind of as advice for the people watching this, I kind of wanted to touch on a few areas, but one of the main ones was language and the language used around autistic individuals. Because even with the best intentions, sometimes the language used can be, I think, used like diminishing of the autistic experience. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit with you about appropriate language used. Obviously, there is the caveat of it's an individual thing as well. What is appropriate for one autistic individual may not be for the other. So obviously, is kind of understanding that person's preferences around it, but kind of general advice and guidance on the appropriate language to use.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because language actually has a really powerful impact on people. And I think there are a lot of people who are worried about getting it wrong. And so they don't really want to engage with it. And that's kind of a bit of a vicious circle, because if you're not prepared to use the language, then we're not going to know what's right and what isn't. So from my personal experience, a lot of my family felt like they couldn't say the word autism or they couldn't say the word autistic. You know, I remember being somewhere with my mum. She needed to advocate for me and she just went, she's ASD, she's ASD. And I was like, just say I'm autistic. Like, it's okay. It's not a bad word. We can say I am autistic, or my brother is autistic, or my friend is autistic. Or if it's their preference, we say my brother has autism. You know, it's like you say, it's personal preference. In terms of, you know, language that we should be using, is there anything that kind of came to mind when you were asking that question?
I mean, it was more kind of along the, like what we mentioned earlier, the high functioning, the low functioning, the understanding of the autism spectrum, that kind of thing. I mean, there's been historic use of the word Asperger's. I think it's like you said, it's one of those things that people are quite scared of. Research moves fairly quickly. And, you know, as more kind of research is done into it, we get more feedback from the autistic community. Like, we can kind of find out what people prefer. But yeah, it was just kind of, I think you made an excellent point. The main thing is don't kind of be scared. It's not a taboo subject. Ask people for their preference.
Absolutely. You know, I think if you have that caveat of, I'm not really sure, but I want you to tell me. I want to know. So if I get it wrong, tell me. Like, if you go in with that approach, then you can't lose, really, can you? Just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to say autism. Don't be afraid to say autistic. You know, I remember when I was much younger, people would kind of whisper about it, like, oh, so-and-so, they've just been diagnosed with autism. It's like we weren't allowed to say it because it was this awful, awful thing. But actually, we know that autism presents so many different experiences and so many different interpretations. And, you know, there are many people out there now who are very proudly talking about being autistic. It's not a bad thing. It's not a, you know, it's not a dirty word anymore. And yeah, my advice would just be, if you don't know, ask, because that's the only way we're going to improve our own knowledge.
Absolutely. I think there is kind of leading on from that, there's a movement of it's an like I am autistic. It's part of my identity. It's not an illness I have. It's not a condition. You know,
Yeah.
different people have different preferences, but there is that
Mm.
movement of understanding autistic identity and that community that comes with meeting other autistic individuals, sharing those experiences, and
Absolutely, yeah.
recognizing it as, yes, it comes with its challenges, but you can see the world in a different way, in an amazing way, and there's definitely strengths to being autistic.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. I think, is there anything, I think that's quite a nice place to kind of round it up, to be honest, on quite a nice positive note. Is there anything else you feel you want to talk about, you want to shed light on, or are you happy with what we've covered?
No, I feel like that's, you know, it's just about raising awareness, really, isn't it? So I feel
Absolutely.
like, yeah, we've covered that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, honestly.
That's okay.
It's been amazing, and thank you for your expertise as well. As I said, I could have talked about this all day. But yeah, it's been really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy.
Cheers.
So thank you everybody for joining us today, and again thanks Bex for your time. It's been lovely to speak with you. If you have any questions, or obviously if you want to pass this on to anybody, the webinar, this will be on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to go and have a look, and you can send that across to people, because it's all about, like Amy and Bex have been talking about here, spreading awareness and acceptance of autism, both for people who you may support in the workplaces and everywhere. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you again soon. Thank you.